With me in the studio this hour, Dan Perry is an international affairs analyst and a former Europe and Middle East editor at the Associated Press. Good to have you with us, Dan. And Yaakov Lapin is the host of the Lapin Assessment on Patreon and is a military and strategic affairs analyst at both the Miriam Institute and the Jewish News Syndicate. Welcome, Yaakov. So let's backtrack a little bit and talk about Hezbollah in Lebanon and that report in the Wall Street Journal, Dan. I mean, do you think that this is an opportunity to push Hezbollah once and for all out of Lebanese politics, or is there a danger of overreach here?
No, I think they should be very ambitious in their reach. It's an opportunity to, first of all, degrade their military and hopefully advance an agenda that leads to their disarming, which is not some crazy request of Israel. It's what is required in UN Resolution 1559 and 1701. Secondly, the political thing is a matter of politics in Lebanon, but it would certainly be desirable if the main Shiite party in Lebanon, given that the Shiites have the plurality among ethnic groups in Lebanon, was perhaps Amal. They're not necessarily everyone's cup of tea, but they're not beholden to Iran the way Hezbollah is. And so there is an opportunity for a lot of changes here. What much of the world seems to miss is that Hezbollah has wrought tremendous damage to Lebanon. Their smuggling and their illicit activities have badly harmed the economy. Their situation, their enmeshing in the Syrian civil war has brought all kinds of damage, and that of course attaches to 1 million Syrian refugees in Lebanon. They have caused all kinds of security problems for the entire country. They embroil it in wars with Israel. They have caused political paralysis, which is why for 2 periods now in the last decade, including now, the country has no president. They are scandalously bad for Lebanon. So when we hear about this report in the Wall Street Journal that the Biden administration seems to understand this even a tiny little bit, that's great. I would be a lot more ambitious than getting them to finally appoint a president. I would push them as hard as possible to either succeed on their own or to seek help for implementing the resolutions that call for the government of Lebanon doing the wacky thing of controlling its own territory and its own borders. So absolutely, it's very sad to hear Western calls for ceasefires, because in order to achieve these goals, what is needed is for Hezbollah to be maximally degraded. We know their leadership has been mostly assassinated, but we don't know to what degree their military capacities have been. I think the end of the war with anything other than Hezbollah no longer a dominant force in Lebanon would be not just bad for Israel, terrible for the region and horrible for the world order. How
much has Israel managed to degrade Hezbollah's capabilities at this point?
So regarding the degradation, I think what we know is that the senior echelon of the whole command structure of Hezbollah has been decimated. The intermediate field level has been severely damaged. And the border infrastructure of the Radwan unit, which was intended to launch on October 7th style attack on northern Israel, is being disbanded and degraded and destroyed as we speak. What remains essentially are tens of thousands of Hezbollah terrorists who appear to have moved away from the IDF's offensive ground offensive zone. And they appear to be largely avoiding direct engagement with the IDF, with few exceptions.
You've pointed out that the difference in terms of international support for Israel's campaign against Hezbollah and its campaign against Hamas in Gaza, and you've suggested that Israel has much clearer war aims when it comes to the war in the north.
Yeah, the situation with the Palestinians is messy. I mean, Hamas is diabolical and that's simple, but the situation with Israel and the Palestinians has moral ambiguity and complexity to it. And this particular Israeli coalition is not built to be able to offer any positive solution. So the world sees all its destruction in Gaza. I think they initially had a lot of sympathy for the aims of removing Hamas and returning the hostages, but Israel won't say what it wants to put in its place. And that just becomes a story that, in terms of communication, you cannot communicate that story. So Israel has hit a cul-de-sac on the Palestinian narrative. With Lebanon, it's real simple. It's one of the odd cases in human conflict and geopolitics where one side is pretty much 100% in the right. And therefore, again, it's ridiculous for anyone to call for a ceasefire without mainly calling for implementation of the resolutions, which would not amount to a regime change, as you suggested before, but a regime protection. There's nothing in the existing Lebanese regime, which does need reforms, that says a non-state actor, which basically is a proxy of Iran, should control the country.
There are a number of key Iranian nuclear sites, Natanz, Fordow. We all know the names. The uranium enrichment is very, very high. And I think Israel may not have a choice because at the end of the day, the Iranians are losing all of their other assets. They're losing Hezbollah's conventional firepower. They've lost Hamas. Nobody is talking about what Hamas might do. So the two main regional tentacles are going offline as far as Iran is concerned. What does it have left? It has its conventional missiles, and it's got the nuclear program. So it may be tempted now to take that nuclear program to the next level because it may feel very threatened. So I don't know if we even have the choice not to do this.
And the Houthis in Yemen have their own concerns and are perhaps the least obedient of all the Iranian proxies. But Dan, President Biden has made it clear he does not want Israel to strike Iran's nuclear facilities.
I really don't know what Biden has made clear in private. I mean, in public, he's all over the place. Like we say, he called for a ceasefire against Hezbollah. I don't think he really wants one. And everything that comes out of the mouths of U.S. politicians right now is completely through the filter of electoral needs. But I would say I fully agree with Yaakov. And my question that remains is, does Israel have the bunker-busting munitions to cause severe damage to facilities that are very deep underground? We know the planes can reach. We know all the rest of it. That is where the mystery, to a degree, lies. And as we wonder what the answer might be, I think it's not irrelevant that a recent former prime minister who does know is calling for this action to be taken.
Absolutely.
So when I hear Bennett say this, it makes me more confident that Israel can do damage. And should it go ahead and do this? Categorically, yes. The alternative of hitting the oil fields is less defensible because that's the Iranian people's economy, and there's legitimate fears.
And it will cause a global spike in oil prices.
The oil prices and the reasonable fears among the Gulf Arabs that are Israel's allies that Iran might strike their fields very nearby in retaliation. But who on earth could possibly object to a degradation of Iran's rogue nuclear program?
But if you actually sort of listen to Turkish citizens when asked, because there seems to be a sort of modicum amount of panic amongst sort of people who follow Erdogan closely in Turkey, who actually have brought into this narrative. And so I think from my perspective, this is mostly for domestic consumption in Turkey.
I'm not in a security cabinet, but I think I know that Israel's not going to invade Turkey. So why does Erdogan say it? Is he a complete idiot? I don't think so. Is he totally crazy? Less unlikely, but I also don't think so. Is it political? Quite possibly, because he's a quasi-elected dictator, and their classic playbook, when they have economic problems, is to invent enemies and, if possible, foreign boogeymen, and if it can be Israel, all the better. So it's for domestic consumption. In addition to which, Erdogan, I think since 2007-8, lost faith in the EU accession progress, and basically has concluded that he's not going to be an EU member, which he's not, because Europe is not going to admit 80 million Muslims. And so his ambitions have moved eastward, this sort of neo-Ottoman, pan-Turkic ambition to lead the Muslim world that's not Arab, let's say. And he must have concluded that talking nonsense against Israel is not inopportune in search of that goal.
It is in China's interest to see America's interest in the Middle East weakened, but at the same time, it doesn't want to see the chaos spiral too far out of control, does it?
It definitely doesn't want to see a general Middle Eastern war because that will disrupt massive amounts of oil flow, and the Chinese economy is dependent on that oil. China has been sort of playing both sides in the Middle East for a very long time, and by that I mean actually the Sunnis and the Shiites. It's friends with the Saudis, it's friends with the Iranians, it has supplied military equipment to both. It also has massive infrastructure projects across the region, and it's gradually converted that economic influence into geopolitical influence without, incurring any of the heavy military costs that the U.S., for example, has to pay when it moves massive resources here, relatively speaking, compared to other powers. And even in places like the UAE, we saw Chinese naval logistics base rising up. So they definitely have interests in the region, and they've been walking this tight line. They've been extremely hostile to Israel at the public level, and this is a good sign. It's a good sign if they're changing their position. China is a massively important global power, and it's in Israel's interest to have it take a more fair line when it comes to this conflict. And let's hope that this pattern continues.
Dan?
Yeah, I mean, the Chinese position on Middle East, I don't think is ideological, the way you could say Iran's is. They have their interests. They certainly want to weaken the U.S., but I think that pales before their need to have this place not go up in flames. And there's no particular benefit that will come to China if the chaos project of Iran to fill the region with proxies and create, nuclear competition prevails. So I have to think that even as they hedge their bets, and even though they would rankle a little bit at too big a Western success, if we eventually see, as I hope we will, regime change in Iran, the Chinese won't be all that upset.
All right, and I just want to get a quick comment from you on Qatar winning its seat once again on the UN Human Rights Council. We didn't have a chance to talk about that right after Hillel Neuer. But I mean, these UN institutions, Dan, are they still serving their purpose?
Some do. The World Health Organization serves a good purpose. The Security Council could, if it was rearranged and the veto power were weakened, I suppose. But the Human Rights Council is a farce and a joke. For all the reasons that Hillel outlined, I think, very successfully. I just wanted to add that this particular organization has had, I believe, 45 resolutions condemning Israel in recent decades, which I'm pretty sure is more than any other country, and may, I'm not sure about this, be more than all other countries. So this is absolute monomania to a point that becomes a joke. I mean, you couldn't caricature it any worse than it is, with countries like Cuba and others playing a major role in preventing the condemnation of true miscreants like Eritrea. As for Qatar, look, Qatar is a country that the region practically needs to bring into the fold, and they want to be brought into the fold. They do bad things, for sure, but they're not Iran at this point. So
if you can't beat them, join them, kind of attitude.
I think we should make them join us, yes.
Jakob, a word on Qatar?
Qatar has been an insidious player for a long time in this region. I think that, look, we saw that the Saudis tried to basically force them to reform their behavior a few years back, placing, this embargo on them.
But they gave up.
And they gave up. And everybody has tried to have a go at Qatar, and they seem to sort of survive.
Well, it was the US President Trump that got them to end
You need the West.
Exactly.
You need the West to lay down the law with Qatar. And I think across the board, the liberal consensus, post-World War II liberal consensus, that has done so much good in the world, basically, since World War II, has fallen apart in how it handles radical Islam and jihadism, and at this point stands accused of ridiculous naivete and ineffectualness. So I would hope after the election, whoever gets elected, really lays down the law with these countries and tells Qatar, look, you want to be part of our fold? Change your behavior and let go of Hamas, and goes to Iran and says what has been accepted up to now is no longer acceptable, and the West does have leverage. And to whoever says, well, who appointed you the world's cop, I say reality, because there is no one else that can do this.
Yeah, and if the U.S. wants to do this, it's going to have to threaten Qatar with things like removing its massive airbase at Al Udeid airbase in Qatar, which the Qataris have spent a lot of money in making one of the most comfortable air bases in the world.
At some
the
point,
Qatari cash flow goes way too long.
You got to call their bluff at some point, and this shift in Western attitudes towards ridiculousness may not come without a price.
We're out of time, guys. Thank you very much indeed. Dan Perry, Jakob Laffin, always a pleasure. Thank you both.